Proud supporters of Africa this week. Engine, with us, you are number one.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Africa This Week, your wrap of what happened across the continent. I'm Mashudu Masuta. Kenya's Treasury will act decisively to stem local currency volatility and hopes to restore confidence in the Kenyan shilling. That's according to the country's Finance Minister, Uhuru Kenyatta, who called an emergency press briefing this week with the country's central bank and Kenya Bankers Association.
Kenya's shilling extended its gains against the dollar in afternoon trade, following the finance minister's reassurance that government will take urgent steps to curb instability in the currency. This follows a week of panic mode in the Kenyan money market, which saw the shilling hit an all-time low of 107 to the US dollar.
I'd like to take this opportunity to assure the business community and the public at large that we are, and indeed going forward, we shall consistently and decisively also stem any instability in our foreign exchange markets and push towards restoring confidence in the Kenya shilling.
The Kenyan shilling, among the world's worst performing currencies, has lost more than 25% of its value since the beginning of the year. One of the most significant steps to curb this weakness is to lower the foreign exchange exposure limit of commercial banks to 10% from 20% with immediate effect.
We welcome CBK's readiness also to meet any genuine demand for foreign exchange through the interbank market. And we also welcome CBK's action to revive the Forex Dealers Forum that will allow commercial bank treasurers to freely interact with the Central Bank of Kenya to ensure that large foreign exchange transactions are met indeed in an orderly manner.
Central Bank Governor Njuguna Ndungu, who has come under fire for poor monetary policy management, said the bank was intensifying its efforts to mop up shilling liquidity through vertical repurchase agreements.
Of course, for tightening monetary policy, most of the questions I get is, what are you doing? Essentially, we are intensifying the mop-up because excess liquidity is actually tightening liquidity that will help us to reduce the pressures from inflation. But essentially, what you have seen and what we have agreed with, even with the central bank operations themselves, is to intensify monetary operations or open market operations, and that means that we are going to use the vertical repos to mop up. But there are also seasonal cycles in terms of liquidity, especially when VAT is being paid. That is the time we also try to deal with reverse repo to help the market. But those two operations are going to be intensified so that we actually deal with liquidity and remove any pressure on inflation.
The ministry and central bank's moves have been taken positively by the market, and analysts say, going forward, rising interest rates should support the shilling gradually.
A recent surge of angry public demonstrations in Europe as well as anti-government protests in Angola suggests Arab Spring tailwinds are still blowing in Africa. We spoke to Richard Fenning, CEO of Control Risks, about the world after the Arab Spring Uprisings.
These things are extraordinary. It's relatively easy to change a government in a heartbeat. It's extraordinarily difficult to change a country. And that's what we're seeing. We've seen regime change, we've seen new regimes come in Egypt, in Tunisia. We're seeing the final throes of the Gaddafi regime in Libya. But what comes next is extraordinarily difficult because these people have risen up in North Africa and parts of the Middle East because they are fed up of being run by incompetent people. And it sounds easy from the outside to say, well, this is how you put Egypt right, this is how you put Tunisia right. The problem is just really deep-rooted. These countries have been mismanaged for a long time. It's going to take a while before people really start to see material benefit, and they will be very frustrated.
I think what fascinated the world is the domino effect, the ease and the speed with which the protests in Egypt spread into Tunisia spread into Egypt, then went to Libya. Now we're seeing it unfolding in Yemen and Syria. And the question is, why wait for 30, 40 years to start expressing yourself like this? What changed? What was the sea change in 2011?
It was a deep sense of frustration. Very specifically, it was rising food prices. And in countries where, for the poor in these countries, a hugely disproportionate amount of their income goes on buying food, when that changes, that really does have a material impact on people's well-being. And it certainly was the domino effect. When people saw what had happened in Tunisia, it gave them confidence in Egypt, and it absolutely then gave them the confidence in Libya. The real dramatic story that is yet being played out is Syria. Libya is attracting a lot of attention because the Gaddafi regime has been notorious, it's been infamous for so long. But in some ways, Libya's story is about Libya. Syria's story is actually about that whole region. It changes the game for Turkey, it changes the game for Israel, it changes the game for Iran. It's a massive geopolitical implications what happens in Syria.
The geopolitical implications, are we going to see significant shifts then in the Middle East, fundamental change across the board?
We already have. We've seen Turkey now as a major regional player having the confidence to try and steer the course of events in Syria by dropping its support for the Assad regime. We've seen Israel now feeling even more vulnerable. Israel never liked Syria, didn't like Egypt very much, but kind of knew where it was with the Mubarak regime, it knew where it was with the Assad regime. Those things are changing. Turkey is now much more of a regional competitor to Israel, and Turkey's big fear of Iran destabilizing is only adding to that general sense of insecurity that they have.
The theory that at the root is an agitated, disaffected youth, food prices withstanding, but it's really about younger people coming to the fore, being able to express themselves democratically, looking for jobs, not finding them, and really and truly finding expression through protests and these democratic shifts.
Yeah, it's about thwarted expectations. It's about people who are both poor and people who are further up the kind of socioeconomic chain, feeling that sense that they're just not getting what they really ought to be able to have, not having an opportunity, an outlet for their own ambition. But it happens in different ways in different countries. You saw yesterday in Yemen the extraordinary sight of mass female demonstrations in Yemen. 12 months ago, 12 weeks ago, nobody would be saying that that was possible. It's worrying because there are so many things at stake in this region, but there are elements of this that are deeply exhilarating to see that kind of people power. I mean, we have to hope and pray that ultimately it works out to the benefit of all of these people, and there will be many, many bumps along the road. But you already see it. You see Saudi Arabia now talking about participation in municipal elections. You hear talks now about what for us regards as a sort of facile example of women potentially being allowed to drive in Saudi Arabia. You see political prisoners being released in Burma. It is having a knock-on effect in different parts of the world.
What about in sub-Saharan Africa? Because the one thing we do have in common with what's going on in North Africa is a young population that's aspirational, that's hungry for change, that wants to be part of a globalized, modern, cosmopolitan world, and really frustrated by the shortage of jobs or wages not being good enough or the inability to get a good education. You can see it across the African continent.
You can see it. I don't think we're going to see an Arab Spring replicated in sub-Saharan Africa. It's very specifically the Arab Spring, not the African Spring, and there are probably some very sound reasons why it's not going to spread south down into sub-Saharan Africa. But those exact reasons that you mentioned, of lack of employment, of sort of a young demographic population, and particularly an urbanizing population. 2008, majority of the world's population lived in towns for the first time in the history of our planet. Urbanization brings with it many, many benefits, but it also brings with it the potential for political radicalization that a rural population largely doesn't have. So the signs are there. I don't think sub-Saharan governments should be nervous or concerned that that wave is going to sweep down the continent from the north.
After the break, more stories making headlines this week.